Sam Montembeault almost started with a muted mic, but I'm actually on the ball tonight almost. Not for a second, but I caught it quick. Sam Montembeault, can we get a round of applause? My goodness. Now, let's be real here in talking about Montembeault. I thought his battle level was absolutely incredible tonight. He made probably the save of the season for Montreal Canadiens goaltenders in that shootout. Uh, the stopping the Forsberg attempted deke by Zibanejad. However, the Rangers played a lot of perimeter hockey tonight. I think the Canadiens, despite the massive shot difference, obviously the Rangers are the better team. Obviously the Rangers have a lot more firepower, a lot more depth, especially with all the injuries to the Canadiens. But the Canadiens played really hard defensively, kept the Rangers out of the middle of the ice for the most part during this game. And in my opinion, I thought the Canadiens actually had higher quality chances overall. They just kept on hitting posts and missing the net. So it was an interesting game overall. I think you could focus on the fact they went up 3-0, the fact that they blew that 3-0 lead. I understand that level of frustration because, hey, this team keeps doing that. They like to blow leads. But, hey, they gutted out a win. Sam Montembeault would not let them lose, despite Mike Matheson trying to make it happen at the last second of OT there. It was a weird one. But we have lots to talk about tonight because, first of all, I'm on my own, so that means I get to, control the narrative a little bit. Although I do want to bring more of the chat in tonight because it's just way more fun when you're all on your own to bring more of the chat in. But I do have to go on a rant before we talk about this game, and I will talk about this game. But as you're here, please make sure you like the stream. Make sure you subscribe to SDPN. We're getting closer. We're inching closer to 100,000 subscribers. We're under 1,000 away now. I think we're at 99.4 thousand subscribers on this channel, and it really helps us when we get to 100,000. So please smash that subscribe button, absolutely annihilate the like button, and share the link on your favorite social media of choice. Tell your friends that you have fun on this Canadiens show, because here's what I'm going to rant about. At least on this show, you have one guarantee. We will talk about the fucking Montreal Canadiens. And listen, Hockey Night in Canada is different because it's a national broadcast. They're covering multiple games at the same time. So sometimes, they're going to focus on teams that are in the playoffs. Understandable. Or narratives that have gone out throughout the season because they only get the one national night per week. However, I've got to call out TSN for their Habs broadcasts lately. Their intermission shows have been a farce. And listen, I love the World Juniors as much as the next Canadian, as much as the next hockey fan, as much as the next prospect nerd. Hell, we made a show about it. We did the gold medal show yesterday. Please check it out if you haven't. It has a lot of amazing analysis from Lauren Kelly and David St. Louis from Elite Prospects, or EP Ringside. But if you're going to put half of your intermission that's a Montreal Canadiens broadcast, it's called Habs on TSN. If you're going to make half of that intermission a replay of your World Juniors coverage to sell the World Juniors, which which TSN did multiple times during the World Juniors, you better not show me any goddamn commercials, because that is a commercial. You're selling me advertising. Don't bullshit me. Either talk about the game that's actually going on or other games that are actually going on. I don't need to see a 10-minute segment that I already watched earlier on that day because I'm a hockey fan who watches the World Juniors. Get your shit together, make better choices. And this isn't about any of the talent on the broadcast. This is the decision-making at the top. And frankly, that's why SDPN exists. That's why Game Over exists, because we looked and we saw that the coverage of these games is shitty. It's shitty and it's not good enough. People want better analysis. They want more analysis about their favorite team. That's why I'm here for you tonight. That's why we're going to go through a mid-season report card, as you might want to put it, for all the players on the Montreal Canadiens, except for the ones who haven't played enough, obviously, like Kirby Dach. Not really much to talk about with him, except for his great start. So let's get into this game a little bit. I was really surprised at how well St. Louis hit on the two lines that he put together after the Christian Dvorak injury. The Gallagher, Evans, Anderson line worked really well, I thought, for most of the game. I do think it's really hilarious to watch Gallagher, one of the best forecheckers of the last decade of NHL action, try to figure out what the hell Josh Anderson is doing with the puck multiple times tonight. It was like he figured the reverse play was going to happen, or he would be prepped for him to rim it around the boards and take it, and Anderson's just very ponderous and doesn't know what to do, and he'll throw it into a different area, and Gallagher's just like, what are we doing here? But eventually, by the end of the game, I think they figured it out. And Gallagher and Evans, they have chemistry. You know, I don't think we talk about that enough. There's a reason why those two played together in 2021 on that Stanley Cup final run. They have chemistry, right? So that was nice to see. And I really like the look of Monahan between the two Scandinavians there. Heineman, I wasn't as good as Ylonen tonight, but I mean, his first real full NHL game, right? Not playing 6 minutes. So mulligan for him, but Ylonen took advantage of that big opportunity tonight, helped create a goal with Monahan. Really excellent game from him. Pulled off that amazing deke in the shootout as well. Hit iron, of course, because that was the story of the Canadiens night, but really good. And the first line, I thought kind of took the night off once the team started scoring and it wasn't them. And then in the third period, they kicked it into high gear and it looked like what we're usually expecting from them. So all around, I think a pretty good night for most of the forwards. Barron and Guhle struggled on defense spectacularly. I thought Struble and Harris were phenomenal, and Matheson and Savard were kind of up and down. That's kind of what I expect from them anyway, playing a role that's probably too big for them overall. Let's see what we got going in the chat here today. Deshirin says, I want to throw out this. Struble was so stable on the back end tonight. He didn't fumble a single breakout pass. I totally agree with you. And not only was he incredibly stable, when Struble did make a mistake, like in overtime, he stumbled at the blue line, and it just so happened that the moment that he stumbled, Chris Kreider got the puck, and it looked like he was going to blow past him. Chris Kreider's not a slow guy, even in his 30s, but Struble just would not be out-battled. He just would not give up, and in the end, what looked like it was going to be a breakaway for Kreider ended up being a battle all around behind the net in the Montreal Canadiens zone, and then Kreider only had one option left, which was to shove the puck up the boards on the other side up to the point. So Struble turned what would have been a high danger scoring chance from one of the better scorers on the Rangers into a nothing play, and that's after making a miscue or like tripping over his own skates, that kind of stuff. So I'm so impressed with this kid, and we're going to talk about him more. But I really love the Northeastern pairing. Kay says, I have to defend Kaiden Guhle's honor on the internet, and that pairing makes it hard to do. Listen, Kay, I have good news for you. We're going to talk nice things about Kaiden Guhle tonight, because as we go over, it's actually surprising how good he's been despite the struggles lately. So there's a lot of good to talk about with Kaiden Guhle. As far as the game goes tonight, I don't want to go too deep into it because I've kind of got a pretty big show planned here, and I hope you all stick with me through it because it's a little bit detailed. This isn't something that I get to do very often anymore because I'm not writing multiple research pieces per week. So I'm talking live with you guys, which is less stats focused. But I really love bringing the analysis and the in-depth stats. So bear with me. We're going to go through this. We're going to switch over to it in a moment here. But before I do, make sure you smash that like button. I really appreciate everyone being here on a night where, it's Saturday night, the new year, you could be doing anything, and you're here talking Montreal Canadiens with me in our lovely chat with these amazing people like Kay, Trinka, Deshirin, Jay, Andrew DH98, Melissa Fournier Martinez, Trizak, Ramelli, all of our usuals, Jean Simard, Claude Martin, Samuel Atias. So many amazing people in this chat that make it a fun place to be. And I think that's what separates these kinds of shows from everything else that's going on right now in hockey media, because you're part of it and you create the vibe of the show. Like I can come in here and be upset and then I'll read the chat for a little bit and all of a sudden I'm feeling good. So let's vibe together, have some good times. I'm going to switch over to my review of the Montreal Canadiens at the halfway point. And we're going to start with Michael Matheson because, frankly, I love Mike Matheson. There were moments tonight where I thought he was exceptional. There was a moment, I believe it was in overtime, where the puck got turned over twice, not by him. And basically what happened was he had to go from a dead stop 2 times against a player who was skating. It was just like this weird back and forth play, and he still managed to stick with the player. I believe it was Zibanejad. It might have not been, but either way, the way that he's able to, at the end of it, and this is while he was already been on the ice for over a minute at this stage, by the way. So the way that Matheson is able to still have legs after a super long shift in 3-on-3, where you're skating even more, like, man, the fitness level on this man is absolutely astonishing. And there are a lot of things that he does really, really well, and a lot of things that he doesn't do very, very well, which is what you can see here. At even strength this year on this chart, which if you look at the left side column here beside me, the offense and the defense at even strength just frankly isn't there. Now you might be saying, well, Matheson's producing a lot of points. How is his offense so low? What this is measuring more than just individual points is how much offense is being created because of this player being on the ice. Now, Matheson creates a lot of offense individually, but I think his limitations from a playmaking standpoint and the fact that he's playing first pair minutes, top matchup minutes when he probably shouldn't be, limits his ability to make his offense, to make team offense, if that makes sense. And defensively, it's been an adventure this year. It's been up and down. I don't think he's as bad as this chart shows. Like, charts are always charts. It's where you start. It's not where you end, right? So we're going to go through these a little bit and talk about it. Obviously, on the power play, Matheson's pretty good. Been a bit unlucky this year. His expected goals above replacement is higher than his actual goals above replacement. On the penalty kill, not his best thing. He has some assets in his game that allows him to be a good penalty killer, but I think that his attitude in always pushing forward and trying to make offense sometimes gets him in trouble. And he has some like attention to detail issues, I think, that don't work very well on the PK. Penalties, draws a lot, which is fantastic, especially for a defenseman. That's very rare, and that comes down to skating ability and, frankly, his willingness to try things other players won't, like going like 1-on-4 on a zone entry and just trying to blast through sticks. That'll draw penalties. He takes a little bit too many penalties too, which is also shown on the chart, which hits it. Now, I don't think he's a 13th percentile defenseman overall. He's a 13th percentile defenseman because he's playing as a number 1 defenseman, and he's ideally a number 3, right? So that's where I am with Mike Matheson. You can see at the bottom of the screen, they've got where his ice time hits in different areas. At even strength, he's not playing that much more than some of the other players in the team, but on special teams, he's just playing too much. Like, there's no reason for him to be in the top, like, 2/3 of first pairing defensemen on the PK. He's not good enough on the penalty kill, or at least better than his teammates enough to play that often on the penalty kill. So I think the Canadiens just need to ease things for him a little bit, and these numbers will improve. All right, let's move on. Everyone's favorite here. We got to talk about Jayden Struble. All right. So Jayden Struble has a very nice defensive score. In terms of percentiles so far this season, 69th percentile in the NHL. Overall, 61st percentile. Offense, a little bit below average, but he's figuring it out. And frankly, his results have been fantastic. And as you can see, like Matheson, his expected goals above replacement is actually lower than his actual goals above replacement. So he's been a little bit unlucky on the offensive side. Special teams doesn't really play on that much, so not a big factor. But for a guy who's just breaking into the league, yes, he's playing third pairing minutes for the most part, but he's drawing calls, which is always a good thing. And he's not taking penalties, which is not just a good thing, but extremely rare on this team, because this team loves to take penalties, and you can see by the ice time breakdowns, like, he's not really playing much on the penalty kill. He's playing just above third pair minutes overall. I do think those minutes are going to go up as the season goes on. He's just been so rock solid. Kay asks, how many games has he played now? I don't know, because these Evolving Hockey, by the way, I should credit Evolving Hockey for these charts. They pace their scores for a full season, right? So it's saying like Struble would have played 43 games in a full season at the pace that he's currently on. So he must be at like 20 something, I guess, or like just under 20. But he's been really, really, really strong. Rudy Rudiger says, honestly, I think sending Montembeault to the All-Star game would be amazing for him. I think of all the Canadiens players, as much as I love Cole Caufield, the scoring hasn't been there so far this year. So I would be voting for Montemo to go in, right? Like he's by far after Suzuki been the Canadiens' best player. So that makes sense to me. I think that makes sense. All right, let's move on from Struble. And obviously, if you guys have any questions about specific players, don't hesitate while I'm going through them. You can let me know. All right, the next one I'm going to go through is Brendan Gallagher, who scored tonight, but it's been a struggle season for him offensively. Now, I do think with these kinds of charts, there's a tendency to diminish context with explaining away, right? And I think this is something that happens a lot when you talk to people who aren't fans of a certain team, and they're saying like, oh, well, you're just making excuses for a player's poor performance. Sure, whatever. But context does matter. Obviously, Brendan Gallagher is not who he used to be. His ability to draw penalties this year just hasn't been there, whether that's ref bias or not. For the last couple of years, he's been one of the better penalty drawing players on the Montreal Canadiens, even while not playing very well. And he's taken a lot of penalties, which also hurts his value. On the power play, not a huge factor. I don't know how much of that is on him versus being on the second unit and not really getting much ice time compared to the first unit. At even strength, defensively and offensively, wildly unlucky. You look at the expected goals above replacement and the actual goals above replacement, and this is a player who should be contributing positively in a fringe second liner role. Fringe first liner on the power play there. He's almost close to first line minutes and not getting much for it. But listen, the results haven't been there this year for Brendan Gallagher. I believe he's the unluckiest player on the team in terms of on-ice shooting percentage and save percentage. I know coming into this one, he was a minus 19, which I didn't realize going in because I was doing a little checkup on the different players. And it's just been a bad season for him in terms of the percentages. But I maintain that despite how bad it looks on the surface, these kinds of models really value actual production, and his hasn't happened, right? We'll see the same thing with Cole Caufield later, but there's a few players on the team I'm going to compare to last year as well, just to show you guys how far this team has come in a very short amount of time. All right, so Gallagher, I know that there's more to him, right? A lot of this has been bad luck. Not saying that he's an amazing player. I think that he is in the right role right now, where he's kind of back and forth between the second and third line. I think that's where he should be. But if Brendan Gallagher was getting any small ounce of luck this season, we'd probably be talking about him as like close to worth his contract. Like that's how good I think he's been outside of scoring for and scoring against. I feel like he's been very unlucky in both areas. So let's go forward here. We're going to talk about Christian Dvorak. I know he's out for the season. This is the third season with Montreal. This is underratedly one of the worst trades, I think, in the last 30 years of Montreal Canadiens hockey. I don't think that it's a situation where you have to compare him to Kotkaniemi. It's just, what was Bergevin trying to do? And it's very clear that he went pure panic mode in losing Kotkaniemi and Danault in quick succession. And then he made this trade to just find a center who was out there, overpaid for him on a contract that was too long, not a really high-paying contract, but unmovable with how he's played, frankly. Like, a guy like Christian Dvorak can't be 5th percentile on offense. And the fact that he's actually been lucky this season in terms of his goals above replacement being above his expected, it's not great. And that's why I think tonight when you saw Jake Evans back at center, I think Jake Evans is just a better player than Christian Dvorak, and it's kind of nonsense the last 3 years that Dvorak has been ahead of him on the depth chart. That is, to me, more trying to help him find his game so they can trade him than actual, like, you know, what you earned, right? What is earned in terms of ice time. I would rather have Jake Evans out there in almost any situation than Christian Dvorak. Maybe face-offs you choose Christian Dvorak, but I don't know. I like Jake Evans significantly more. Audio Murphy says, Gally sucks, get rid of his contract. Well, listen, you're not going to be able to trade that contract anytime soon because the production's not there and it's a long contract. So I would say get right with Gallagher and appreciate the things that he brings because he's not moving. All right, I am gonna switch gears here a little bit because we started out with the players who are for sure not moving. Right, Dvorak's injured, so he's not moving. I want to move into the players who I think have some trade bait. And these graphics, by the way, don't include tonight, so they'll be a little bit different, but not much. I want to talk about David Savard. Because David Savard has found the fountain of youth, folks. He's decided that he can create offense. And the crazy thing is, the amount of offense that he's creating at even strength, he's been unlucky, even with all the goals that he's scored in this short period of time. I mean, if you watched him tonight, there were several plays, incisive plays that he made. I believe he got a second assist on one of the goals as well that he played. I think it was on Gallagher's goal, actually. Or maybe it was that he set up the Jake Evans one-timer. I don't remember. Yeah, it was. Yeah, on the Gallagher goal, he got the secondary assist because he held the line. He actually made a really fantastic play. And the defense, it's a mess, right? I think we all knew that going in. He has the reputation as a defensive defenseman. But the last few years for him have been a struggle. He plays minutes way above his own head. But it seems like Savard has kind of made a decision that, like, yeah, he's going to get burned defensively, but why not have fun? It's near the end of his career, probably. And he's creating offense, man. Like, we talked a lot the last 2 years about how he would pull that Savardian spinorama once in a while and fool teams. But he's doing so much more than that right now. His shot is blistering lately for whatever reason. He's just really pushed it. And I know he was an offensive producer in junior and early on in his NHL career as well. But this is a nice little bump for him, and it's pushed him from being actually among the worst defensemen in the league the last 2 years to being in around the mid-range. And I think now he's made himself not necessarily a target for teams, but I could see teams looking around late on deadline day when some other defensemen have moved and saying, hey, we need some playoff depth. Who's a guy who could play penalty kill and won't hurt us? And David Savard in a third pairing role, the way he's playing right now, he can make a team better. He can make a team better. A fellow Andrew says Savard is old. He needs to, can't see that. What does it say? Needs to trade him out. Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah, they do, but it's less about Savard needing to go at this moment than it is about clearing the way for guys like Xhekaj to get back in the lineup, right? And there's such a clog at defense. They've got to get on it. All right. Injured, but we'll still talk about him. Tanner Pearson. This is a guy that early in the season I had hopes would kind of have a big comeback season and be a guy who gets you a lot more at the deadline than you think, but his defensive play has been really rough this year. Offensively, he's had some moments. His shot is pretty good, but defensively, he's just been such an anchor there. Whether it's Monahan as a center or anyone else, it's been an issue. I think he's in a position now where if he comes back and gets healthy in time, it's just depth, right? He's a guy that's probably going to be acquired to be like a 13th forward on a cup contending team that they're going to spend like a 4th or 5th round pick on just because he's got that Stanley Cup pedigree. He's got a long history of being a guy who can move up and down the lineup. So he's going to be a guy who will fit in somewhere along the lines. I don't think he's unmovable, but the defensive play is an issue. And if he does come back, I wonder if there's a way that the Canadiens can kind of hide him a little bit to make it less apparent, because he loses a lot of battles. He gets a little bit outsped, I guess, outraced in his own zone. And that just kind of, it makes it hard. Deshirin says, I've always just kind of felt guy about him. He's been a warm body and some teams need that. Might get a 7th or something. Yeah, that's basically what it is at this moment. I mean, maybe he'll come back and kill it, right? You never know. But at this point, not that hot on him. Sean Monahan. Now, there's two schools of thought with Sean Monahan, right? There's some people who think that his play hasn't been as great this season, and especially after the hot streak at the beginning of the year cooled off, and the Canadiens won't get much for him. I very much disagree. The defensive numbers are terrible, But remember that he's spent almost the entire season either with Pearson or with Josh Anderson. Both those guys really, really drag down the defense. Now, if you add to that Monahan himself is not a big defensive player, you get numbers like these, where he's just getting destroyed defensively. And this has been an issue for most of the season. As much as people want to focus on the power play stuff, it is an issue. However, his offense is pretty good. Now, he's getting lucky at even strength overall, but power play, he's a weapon. He frankly is a weapon. He is a high percentage shooter as well. He's a guy who can play center. I think if you insulate him on a good team in a second or third line role, he's going to put up results. He also has a contract that is extremely digestible for literally every team in the league. Like, come deadline time, almost everyone has the room to fit in a $2 million player. And a $2 million player at the caliber of Sean Monahan, even with the looking a little bit rough on the chart here, I think they're going to get a good return for him. Probably a low first round pick or a couple second round picks, something like that, with another sweetener in there. He's a good leader. He's a good person. He is deadly on the ice with the puck on his stick, whether it's passing or shooting. There's too much that Sean Monahan is good on to get too bogged down in the defensive play. Unlike a guy like Tanner Pearson, who isn't able to bring those elements. He's not a guy who pushes play. And I would argue that Sean Monahan is not a huge play driver either, but we have to put in the context that he hasn't played with the best players in the Montreal Canadiens either. And after you get past that first line, the drop-off happens pretty swiftly. Now, here's the one of guys that I think could be traded this year that is actually pretty exciting, I think, for the Montreal Canadiens. Scored tonight, has been scoring a lot lately, actually. Yoel Armia. Now listen, offense, not really his thing. Defense this year, he's looking like his old self. This is how he played in 2021 when the Montreal Canadiens went to the Stanley Cup final. 98th percentile for Yoel Armia. And it's not like he's playing fourth line minutes either. He's playing mid-tier third line minutes at even strength, as you can see, and a lot of minutes shorthanded, where on a terrible penalty kill, his shorthanded results and inputs are spectacular. Now, he doesn't draw enough penalties, and he takes too many penalties. That's something that teams will pay attention to, but the fact that Armia has regained his game after a couple years of looking so nonchalant and uninterested is big. Now, he may not be traded this season, right? Because he's still got another year left, I think it's just 1 year left after this one, where teams will have to digest that big cap hit. The Canadiens could retain, I believe. They have one retaining slot left, but I'm not sure they're interested. They might ride this out and try to get more for him next year if he can continue playing this way. I wouldn't risk it personally when he's playing this well. I would not be surprised if a couple contenders come sniffing. You cannot beat him in a board battle. It's true. Okay, apparently my computer doesn't want to record this show anymore, so I'll have to grab the audio later. That's all right. I've been doing a lot of stuff on the computer and using way too much space. I'm trying to build a big photo album for my parents of the kids. So I've got like 10,000 photos duplicated on my computer. It's like 60 gigs. It happens. All right. So Yoel Armia, people, please stop dogging on this guy. We gotta talk about what's actually happening and not get focused too much on the past. I don't think this guy should be a punching bag anymore. He's playing really well. Frankly, if the Canadiens were trying to win right now, if they were truly trying to compete, I think when you have the Monahan, Ylonen, Heineman line, you would probably want to have a big amount of sheltering for that line, right? Get them into offensive situations constantly, keep them out of defensive situations, insulate the young kids and Monahan, who's not great defensively. And then you would probably take the Gallagher-Evans line and put Armia on there instead of Anderson, because that can be your shutdown defense line, right? Then the first line gets a little stress taken off of it and pushes play its own way. And the fourth line can be whatever. And I know people are probably pulling their hair out at the idea of Josh Anderson on the fourth line, but we got to talk about Anderson because he's up next on the trade bait. I don't know how they'll be able to do it. I know that teams value this guy because he's big and fast, but Josh Anderson, it's ugly, folks. It's really ugly. Not only is Anderson having a tough time, I know the scoring is happening now, but everything else is not good. The craziest thing about Anderson is his offensive results this season in terms of on ice goals above replacement or goals scored over the average of the team. He's been wildly lucky. Even while his shooting has been down, his lines have been producing in spite of him. And that's bad because they haven't been producing that much. His chart is scary. Now, he is playing too much, especially on the power play. Not so much anymore, but obviously you look at the chart, he's getting more than first line minutes on the power play. It's too much. Basically, Josh Anderson right now, his value to the Montreal Canadiens is he draws penalties, and he hasn't been taking that many relative to usual. That's not enough. It's not enough for his contract. It's not enough for half of his contract. This is a player who, unfortunately, is a black hole on this team. I do think that there are teams that play systems that would be more favorable to Josh Anderson's style of play, but on this specific team, the way Marty wants them to play, it's not working. It hasn't worked since they acquired him. He scores his own goals, but he doesn't make lines better. He doesn't mesh with lines, and it's been, how many years now where it's a constant question, where do we put Josh Anderson? And for that much money with that much term, that's not a question you can have. It just doesn't make sense. And for the people who think that they should have, that they should be keeping him around for after the rebuild, I want to know what game you're watching, because it's not the one that I'm watching. And I'm not trying to be mean to Josh Anderson, I swear, but it's ugly. It's ugly, and there's no way around it. All right, we're going to switch it up here. There's people, holy shit, in the comments. Yeah, it's bad. It's bad. It doesn't look good. I'm going to start looking at some players year over year here in a second, but first we got to go to Jake Evans. All right, so Jake Evans, turn off Anderson. There you go. Jake Evans, solid. 51st percentile for a fourth line guy, which I know he's not playing fourth line, is really good. His defensive numbers are worse than I expected, but I think a lot of that has to do with playing on a penalty kill that isn't good, and he's the only good guy on that top unit. He's the only difference maker on the top unit, so his defensive results suffer, even though he himself is doing good stuff. I think you watch that PK, and I don't think anybody would disagree with me that Jake Evans is the best penalty killer currently playing for the Montreal Canadiens. Rafael Harvey-Pinard is injured. But the defensive results suck. Offensively, he's got crazy luck in terms of what's being produced while he's on the ice. I know he doesn't have a lot of production himself, but the man's getting it done. You can't expect him to have this much luck going forward. But a guy who's just even across the board pretty much, who draws penalties, doesn't take a lot of penalties, doesn't hurt you. Frankly, this is a season that Jake Evans needed, because Owen Beck is coming down the pipeline, and it's happening fast. And I know I just said that in a way that has a lot of innuendo. I apologize. I mean, Owen Beck, who is awaiting a trade to Saginaw, now that Christian Dvorak is out for the season, I wonder if he's going to get another NHL emergency call-up at some point this year. I don't think he will, because the Canadiens want him to go to Saginaw and play for the Memorial Cup, and it would be wild for Saginaw to, trade for him, and then the Canadiens call him up and he's just in the NHL now. I feel like the OHL would absolutely freak out, but Beck is knocking on the door, and it's going to happen sooner or later. So Evans needs to establish himself as a guy who isn't expendable, and I think he's doing that this season, frankly. When you're looking at fourth line players, you're looking at 25th percentile guys, right, at forward. And he hasn't been a 25th percentile guy, as you can see, 50th. So that's pretty good, or 51st. I really like Jake Evans. As you can see, his even strength time on ice is way above a fourth liner. Shorthanded, he's playing a ton of minutes. He's in there. Charles G says Suzuki. I will get to Suzuki, I promise you. I'm saving him for last because it's the best news, all right? So let's keep Jake Evans in mind as we go into the comparisons. So the first thing I got to do is cut myself off here. and we're going to look at Jesse Ylonen. Obviously, this doesn't count tonight. I'm going to put myself in a tiny little box up top there so you can still see me. So there's been a lot of talk about Ylonen this year and how he deserves a shot. And if you look at the offensive numbers, absolutely, right? Defense hasn't been there, as opposed to last year where he was actually quite credible defensively. A decent third line guy or better on the defensive side of the puck, playing fringe second line minutes last year. This year, fourth line minutes. You would think easier competition, better defense, but when you exchange playing with, Kirby Dach at times last year to playing with Michael Pezzetta, no, not to say anything mean about Michael Pezzetta, but he is who he is, right? He's a fourth line guy, not a big defensive contributor. I don't know how much of Ulanen's fall off defensively is on who he's playing with and how much is on him trying to get noticed by Marty and push the offense, and that coming at a cost to his defense. I still think this is a good player who I want to see more of, but I think that you look at what's actually happened this season, and I do understand the hesitance that St. Louis has had to move him up the lineup. Yes, he's producing. Can't disregard that on a team that really struggles to produce. I think the big thing for me is, why is Ylonen held accountable for his defensive play and not moved up the lineup when Josh Anderson is not? And frankly, it's seniority and contract status, right? And I know that there will be some people who will criticize St. Louis for that, and I think he deserves that criticism, but every NHL coach in NHL history does that kind of stuff. And it's just something that as fans, you have to grit your teeth and get through. And if you're Jesse Ylonen, you have to find a way to push yourself above a guy like Josh Anderson in the depth chart. And maybe he's found that now with Monahan, getting to play with Monahan. That's a huge opportunity. We'll wait and see. But halfway through the season, he hasn't been that great. Charles says Suzuki, Dach, Beck, Evans next year as a centers, hopefully. I mean, I would not be surprised. It would need some trades, but I wouldn't be surprised at all. The one thing that I worry a little bit with Dvorak going down is Habs management like flinching a little bit and thinking that they can't afford to move Monahan at the deadline because they have like 2 NHL centers in the organization at that point. So I hope they don't make that mistake, because they need to move Monahan. As much as I like him, you got to find a way to get value, right? So Ylonen needs an opportunity, should get an opportunity, but he's got to prove it as well. All right, let's go to Rafael Harvey-Pinard, a guy who isn't talked about much since he left with injury. And obviously you see no percentiles here for this year because he's barely played, but we can still look at the results, right? Last year, positive across the board, except for shorthanded, playing fringe first line minutes, playing almost on the top line power play, playing top line on shorthanded. This year, he's way into top line shorthanded. Results are absolutely stellar. Best penalty killer on the team by far. When it's Harvey-Pinard and Evans out there, I think this team has a really strong penalty kill. When it's not, less. Power play hasn't seen a lick so far this year, and offensively this year, the results haven't been as good. Obviously, didn't score before he got injured, but if you look at the opportunities that he's had this year compared to last year, he's not playing with Nick Suzuki. I think he got like 2 or 3 games with Suzuki at the beginning of the year when the scoring wasn't happening for Nick yet. So it makes sense that the offense has dried up a little bit. He's been a little lucky in terms of on ice compared to what he's contributed. But we see last year that when he gets an opportunity, he can make bank on it, right? I don't think he is going to shoot at the high percentage that he shot last year. But this kid, I call him a kid, he's 24. He's a good player, and I think we underestimate him overall. I heard a lot of people coming into the season talking about like it'd be ridiculous to have him on the top line. Not on a rebuilding team. I think he's a middle sixer right now. I saw a lot of people calling him a fourth liner. I really don't believe that's where he'll fit in the NHL long term. I think he's got at least 5 or 6 years where he'll be a middle sixer who can contribute, who can score goals, who can set up plays, who can cause havoc in front of the net, and frankly is really strong defensively. Both seasons that he's been in the NHL, really strong defensive results in varying situations, seems to be able to play on every line. Melissa says he turned 25 today. Happy birthday, Rafael Harvey-Pinard. Back on the ice today, actually, for morning skate and practice. So he could be returning to the lineup pretty quickly. The newly 25 Rafael Harvey-Pinard. Hey, you can rent a car now without paying extra insurance. Good for you. Next up, I want to look at Alex Newhook. Now, Newhook is a guy that I don't think we've seen enough of yet to make any strong proclamations. But here, like in the games that he's played, look at that offensive impact. Not just in terms of goals above replacement, but expected, right? He was blisteringly good offensively at even strength. You could tell from the time on ice, St. Louis was giving him opportunities. He's right there on a top line, right? He's getting top line minutes at even strength. He's getting top line minutes on the power play. He was getting opportunities to produce, and he was making bank on those opportunities, creating as much as he was given, right? Defensively, last year quite good, this year quite bad. Now, this is kind of the same thing with Ylonen, right? But it's a different situation for Newhook as well, because he's trying to prove himself to a new coach and a new team, trying to look like a top six guy instead of a third, fourth line guy, which he was in Colorado. And there's a trade-off sometimes with players as they're getting, like they're trying to find their feet. Newhook is still young. You know, I think he's got a great future ahead of him if he can figure it out. The energy that he plays with, the speed that he plays with, his skill level. I believe in this player as a guy who can fit long term, but he does have a lot of work to do to round his game out. If he can keep this level of offensive production or close to it and become just a mid-tier defensive player, he's a good player. He'll play in the NHL for a very, very long time. Kay says I think he's still figuring it out, or very much still figuring it out. I agree. And once him and Slafkovsky and Anderson were removed from that line with each other, all three of them were better off, right? So we have to take that into account as well in these numbers for Newhook, that half of Newhook's season was spent on a line that flat out did not work in any way. It was non-functional. So how much do we read into that, right? Still to have this kind of offensive production in that line is really impressive, frankly. And I'm looking forward to seeing him back in the lineup around the trade deadline. All right, we talked a lot last year about all these young players, all the rookies on defense, now a lot of sophomores and Jayden Struble, and how we expect a lot of them to progress, but development's not linear. Not all of them will progress, right? Let's talk about a couple of those now. First up is healthy scratch tonight, Jonathan Kovacevic. Another guy who has pushed his offense this year. You look at his expected goals above replacement compared to last year, and it's wildly better, right? He is really pushing play offensively. He's actually playing a little bit less at even strength, despite getting a bigger role to start the season, and a little bit more on the penalty kill. Penalty kill, he's very, very good. Probably the best defenseman on the team in terms of pure penalty killing prowess, which makes him it gives him a lot of value. Defensively at even strength, it's been a bit of a struggle this year. It's been a problem, and he hasn't been able to translate what he did last year as a consistent third pairing guy who played more than third pairing minutes, right? Because they kind of evened things out as the year went on. He hasn't been able to translate that when put up against stronger competition. Now, in his mid-20s, this is pretty much the player that he's going to be. So Jonathan Kovacevic is kind of stuck right now in a situation where to be more than a depth defenseman, he needs to find something else to differentiate himself. And, you know, maybe that is the penalty kill. Maybe it is jumping into plays and scoring some goals. But I think where he's hurt right now is, he's got 5 goals, but only 2 assists, which means he's not necessarily finding himself as involved in offensive plays as you might imagine, even though his offense on these charts is great, right? It's really strong. So Kovacevic has got to either find a way to round out his defensive game again, make fewer mistakes, play within himself a little bit more, or find something else to stick out as. Because right now, among this group with all these rookies, he does run the risk of, being edged out by guys who are just a little bit better. And one of those guys who has an opportunity to push him down out of the lineup even further is Arbor Xhekaj. Now, Xhekaj hasn't played enough games to get percentiles this year, so you just have to look at where things are. Overall, you look at it and you're like, okay, it's not an amazing player. Now look at it compared to last year when we looked at Xhekaj and thought, hey, this is a guy who can do more at this level than just fight. And you could see the outline of the player that he could become last year. Now this year, unlucky offensively, but really strong underlying numbers and defensively as well. Last year, terrible defensively, like really, really not good. This year, much better. Power play, he's actually able to do some stuff both years. His shot is deadly. I actually might prefer him on the power play to Matheson, honestly. I think that he's less impatient with his passes and less impatient with his shot as well. He's not as willing to just like hammer it towards the net because he doesn't like the options that he has. When Xhekaj shoots, he finds lanes. He's very good at it. So I think that there's still, some people are worried about him. The penalties is an issue. I do think he should draw more calls considering how much people mess with him. But I see a player here. I see a player who could be significantly better than what I thought last year and what I thought before I knew about him and what I thought at the beginning of the year. He's a player who just keeps on improving, and I'm excited to see him back in the NHL. He's absolutely crushing it right now in Laval, and it's not about the fights. It's not even about the physicality. I legitimately think that he's one of the better defensemen on the team right now, and I want to see him back in. All right, let's move on to another guy who hasn't really impressed this year, and that's Justin Barron. Now, sometimes there's progress with guys, and sometimes they fall back, and Justin Barron's just the same guy. He looked like he was going to take a big jump at the beginning of the year when they called him up, and it's been a struggle lately. That struggle has kind of put him in the same spot as last year. Power play, better than last year. His actual inputs on offense, better than last year, but he's been wildly unlucky. He's, I think, 7 goals above replacement in terms of or expected goals above replacement in terms of his offensive contributions, and over 3 below in actual outputs, which just sucks because I feel like he's a guy that if he was getting the scoring going, his defensive confidence would be brought up as well. But Barron has not taken a step. And now, you're looking at the rest of the season and you're like, you're going to pay attention, right? You're going to say, is he going to take the step? Is he going to start figuring it out defensively? And defensively, it's the same issue over and over. If his back is turned to the play, he doesn't scan the ice and he thinks he has more time than he does. And he ends up turning the puck over, being too casual. It's game in, game out, this same problem. I don't know if he's going to figure it out, but if he wants to be a long-term NHLer, he's got to, because 24th percentile in terms of overall impact because of defense will get you out of the league. He is definitely better than like a number 6 defenseman or a number 7 defenseman. But when your issue is defense, coaches won't trust you. And Marty St. Louis has been very patient with him, trying to get him going. I appreciate that as someone who likes the way that St. Louis handles prospects or young players, but he needs to find confidence in himself and he needs to start scanning in the defensive zone with his back to the play. If he can figure out the confidence, I think he's a player. I do think he's a long-term player for the Montreal Canadiens if he can figure it out. But he's got players behind him who are going to challenge. And yeah, maybe a guy like Jayden Struble isn't as exciting as Justin Barron, but right now, Jayden Struble is a better player. Flat out. He's a better player than Justin Barron. So he's got to figure it out. Now, speaking of guys who took a step back, it's weird because he had a great game tonight, right? And ever since they put that Northeastern pairing together, I think he's been really, really solid. But Jordan Harris, it's been a bad season. It just has. Now, a lot of that is before he got hurt. Since he's come back, I think he's a little bit better. He played hurt for a bit as well, so that's going to impact the numbers. But you look at last season, he was playing more minutes, tougher minutes, and playing better, right? So something hasn't worked out for Harris so far this year, whether he's gotten lost in the mix a little bit and his role isn't as defined. I think that's a part of it. It seems like it's been a struggle for him to move up the lineup, Whereas last year, he was kind of St. Louis' go-to guy at even strength. It was, if he needed to calm a game down, he relied on Jordan Harris. And Harris hasn't been that dependable guy this year for whatever reason. Now, like I said earlier, development's not linear. There are going to be guys that have sophomore slumps, and it seems like that's what's happening to Harris. I still look back at last year in much more high leverage minutes, and the results that he put up, I want to wait. And this is why the people who are kind of looking at clearing space for guys like Struble, guys like Xhekaj, like, oh, just trade Jordan Harris. Because number one, he's the smallest guy, so people key in on him. And number two, his game is not like dynamic and exciting, even though he's a fast skater. He doesn't have a lot of offense to contribute necessarily. He's just a very safe player. So people feel that he's the guy to move. But right now is the worst time to move him. He's having a tough season. He's undersized, so he has less value on the trade market. He's cheap. You just signed him to an extension. And also, the guy's a leader. Like, you listen to him talk on and off the ice. He's such a good kid. And I call him a kid. He's 23. But I really like this player, and I don't think the Canadiens should move on from him. They've got to just trust at this point that he's going to rebound, because it's not very often that a guy like him puts up an 80th percentile defensive season, 72nd percentile overall as a rookie, essentially, on a team that has no defensive depth last year, where he's trusted constantly. He's playing first pairing minutes as a 22-year-old coming out of college at even strength, and he's killing it. That doesn't go away overnight, right? So it's a tough season for him. He's such a smart guy. I think he's going to find a way back. I think the rest of the season is going to go better for him as well. So we'll wait and see. Yeah, Deshirin says, I'm not really worried about it. Kay, agreed. Romelli, I love him with Struble. Trinka, he's very smart. Very sweet too, says Kay. I agree. I really like the guy. I think he's going to be really good this year. Or not necessarily this year, but going forward. All right, let's talk about Kaiden Guhle. Kay, this is for you, okay? So there's a lot of discussion about Kaiden Guhle really struggling with Justin Barron, and that's true. He had a tough night tonight, too. I believe, I only checked it going into the third period. I haven't checked Natural Stat Trick since, but he was the worst on the team in terms of the expected goal differential. It was a tough night. Now, part of that's because Kaiden Guhle's playing top matchup minutes most of the time, especially if Matheson's not available. But it's been a struggle lately. We all recognize that. However, we've got to remember that last year we saw Kaiden Guhle. Oh yeah, his expected goals for percentage tonight was 6.56%. He looked good in OT though. Yeah, it's not the best game to pump Kaiden Guhle's tires, so apologies for that. But let's look at Kaiden Guhle here compared to last year, because last year, remember, we talked about Kaiden Guhle as a guy who looked great, but his numbers were terrible. Now last year, 22nd percentile, playing first pairing minutes, really overtaxed. First pairing minutes on shorthanded as well. This year, his shorthanded minutes have been cut a bit. He's been a little bit better shorthanded than last year, but at even strength, come on, up to 66th percentile. This is a strong second pairing defenseman at 21 years old. This kid is going to be so good. He's going to be so good, especially if he can get a defense partner that truly complements him. I do think the Canadiens need to separate him and Justin Barron right now, because both of them their confidence looks shattered at times, and they're not helping each other. So move them around. Whether that means you have to break up Savard and Matheson, sure, I would keep the Northeastern guys together. You know, I don't know what to do, because Savard doesn't work with Guhle either, but you got to find something else. Maybe Kovacevic comes in and Barron goes down to the American Hockey League for a little bit to marinate, to allow Xhekaj to come back up. You know, we know Barron gets better when he plays in the American Hockey League. He seems to find his game. Although, maybe if you're the Canadiens and you saw that comment from Jean-Francois Houle, you don't want to send Barron to the American Hockey League, because he kind of trashed him to boost Xhekaj for no reason, which was a bit messed up. But I don't know. I think Barron is a guy that he doesn't seem to get flustered by development. He gets flustered by his own play, and you just kind of need to give him a kick in the butt a little bit to get him back going. And I think to get Kaiden Guhle going is more important than to get Justin Barron going. and they really have to get him back to what we know he can be. I mean, Guhle at the beginning of the season was unbelievable. He was the Canadiens' best player, bar none, for the first 20-something games of the season. It's been a little bit of a struggle since then, but still, the underlyings remain very strong. I'm a big Kaiden Guhle booster. We'll see how he goes. Now, we're getting into the exciting stuff. It's top line time. Now, remember what we said about Newhook, and that we have to account for how bad things were on that line. The same thing goes for the next guy. We're going to talk about Juraj Slafkovsky. Juraj Slafkovsky, last season, 7th percentile. Defense, mid. Offense, non-existent, right? And unlucky, of course, but the offense just flat out wasn't there. Penalties, still a bit of an issue. But this season, look at that big improvement, right? 7th percentile to 31st, and that's including that run with Anderson and Newhook. So it doesn't really work this way for these kinds of charts, but if you were to isolate just when he started on that top line, I feel like it would look quite a bit better, right? Still, the offense is not great in terms of his own production, but how often Slafkovsky is involved in creating plays that end up in goals. Even tonight, Brendan Gallagher's goal started with a ridiculous play by Juraj Slafkovsky where his stick was tied up, and instead of trying to get it loose, he just put both his arms behind his back and still got the puck and passed it for a breakout pass. It was ridiculous. He is an absolute beast right now. I agreed to Sheeran. He is a beast. How often he goes into corners with two players and ends up with the puck is incredible. And now that you're seeing his confidence in his shot starting to show through, I think there's a lot of people around the league who saw last year a guy who frankly was not ready for the NHL and made up their minds that he was going to be a bust. And I look at him now, game in, game out. He's been so consistent for a month and a half at least. He hasn't had up and down games. He's just been there every game. His instincts are on point. He makes good plays in every zone. I was talking earlier today about how good he's been defensively. You watch the first couple shifts tonight against the Rangers, and he was out there against Panarin, and Panarin couldn't get anything done. He could not get around Juraj Slafkovsky in the defensive zone. I would try him out on the penalty kill. The penalty kill's been so bad. Let him give it a shot, right? Let the 19-year-old play around. But I see this kid as a huge part of the future now. I'm a believer in Juraj Slafkovsky. I think he's going to be significantly better than his detractors thought was possible as a ceiling. His ceiling is really high. I think he's going to end up being, if not the best forward in that draft class, the most impactful one. I think the way that he's able to shift gears and shift the game at both ends of the ice is just incredible from where he was last year. And I know he's a puppy dog and he's the fan base's baby. So everybody is really excited anyway, but get even more excited because eventually this kid is going to start scoring, especially if he continues to play with Suzuki and Caufield. It's going to be really, really fun. All right, let's talk about, did I not? Okay, I missed loading Caufield's last season. I forgot to do that. So let me just do that quickly while talking about Slafkovsky still. You know what? No, we'll shift into Suzuki, and I'll talk about Suzuki while I load up Caufield's. So Suzuki is the biggest one. It's the biggest change in the Canadiens' fortunes because last year, Suzuki was good, but defensively, he couldn't carry the bag while maintaining his offense. He's jumped from 65th percentile. He's usually in the 70s, 60s over the course of his career. 90th percentile in overall impact. Look at the defense. Sorry. Look at that defensive impact. 99th percentile. 99th. A power play weapon who's been unlucky, stuck on a terrible power play team. He draws penalties. He doesn't take penalties. He kills penalties. First out for the shootout. First out for this coach, for every coach, in every situation. Nick Suzuki has gone from a maybe 1A, 1B center to, in my mind, if he can continue this season, He's a number one center, without question. Now, to put into context, I went back and looked at different Habs centers over the last, back to like 2007, 2008, through evolving hockey, because, it only goes back to 2007, 8 for these kinds of metrics. And there was no Habs center who had this kind of impact, not offensively and defensively. Maybe Deneau during the years with Gallagher and Tatar, but Suzuki at this young age as the Habs captain, this season, if it continues this well until the end of the season, will be better than any single season Thomas Plekanec ever had. And think of how good Thomas Plekanec was, right? People question him being a top center all the time, but I believe he was like 26th of 30 in terms of center production throughout his career with Montreal. Suzuki can do more than that, especially with Cole Caufield beside him, especially with Slafkovsky beside him. Deshirin says Vegas made a huge mistake. Yeah, could you imagine how that trade would look if Bergevin got the guy he wanted, which was Cody Glass? Pays to be lucky, I'll tell you that much. But yeah, Suzuki has just been an absolute revelation. And, I've noticed that over the last couple of years, when Suzuki is the only guy possible from the Canadiens to make the All-Star game, there's been kind of barbs from opposing fans, right? Like, oh, he doesn't really deserve to be there. He's only there because the Canadiens need to have another or a representative, right? So that's not happening this year. You can tell it's not happening. There are very few people who are questioning Nick Suzuki right now, and for good reason. He is undeniable this season, and if he can maintain that, it changes so much for the Canadiens rebuild. It makes acquiring players easier. It makes fitting players in easier. And he's doing this again, as the only healthy center, right? I know Monahan's here right now, but, Monahan's been banged up in therapy days throughout the season as well. And, eventually he'll probably be traded. Dvorak's not coming back. Doc's not coming back. Like, he has no legitimate person on this team who can draw checks away from him. Every time he steps on the ice, everyone on the opposing team knows where Nick Suzuki is at all times, and he's still able to pull it off. All right, so let's talk about Cole Caufield now, because it's a season that I don't think Cole's very happy with in terms of scoring. You look at his numbers offensively, it's not great. It's okay, but not for the contract that he was handed out, not for what we expect from Cole Caufield. But look at the improvement on defense. Now, a lot of the drop in Caufield's offense is just pure finishing. Now, he's scoring, I think his shot rate it's a little bit above 8% right now on the season. Under St. Louis, it's over 17% coming into this season. I think he's probably a 15 to 16% shooter in the league right now, as it's currently constituted, with save percentage considerably lower. Average shooting percentage for all players this season is closer to 9%. Does anybody really believe Cole Caufield is a below average NHL shooter? We all know he's been unlucky. If he would have carried over last season's shooting percentage, right now he'd have 22 goals. I don't think anybody would be complaining. That would put him over a point per game. You have to imagine another 11 goals would have Suzuki at least another, 6 or 7 assists, so he'd be over a point per game. How much better would Slafkovsky look if Caufield was finishing? So this line, as good as it currently is even better, right? So I think Caufield, this improvement defensively, if he can just keep it mid, right? Middle of the pack, as opposed to terrible, like when he first broke into the NHL, and continue getting his goal scoring back to what it was, he's a killer, right? He's a killer that every team would want. He's not just a Mike Hoffman style guy who goes in and shoots and scores 30-35 in his prime, and he's a huge liability defensively all the time. He is becoming a two-way player, not an elite two-way player, but a pure sniper who doesn't hurt you defensively. That's money. And it's really, really good news for the Montreal Canadiens. So that's what I've got for you here tonight. I hope it was fun. I know we went pretty long with it. We'll open it up to questions now because I know you guys have probably got some good questions. You can ask about any of these charts, any of these players, anything you want to. This is a Montreal Canadiens show. We're going to dive in deep. So let's get into it. I'll switch back to the solo camera now. Let's see here. Trinket says, Cole Caufield's mom liked my tweet about his brother Brock. I went to look at her Twitter and it's like 75% Brock, 20% Cole, and 5% her and Amanda Suzuki. That's too cute. I mean, my guess is that Cole gets enough attention that the parents want to shine up Brock a little bit. Kay says, Andrew, I had so much fun. Me too. It's nice to talk after a win. And it's been a long time since I was able to go through, and nail down on all these players. And when you look at this rebuild, I know it's 3 seasons now of a lot of losing. I know they didn't lose tonight, but you guys have stuck with this show. It's meant the world to me. It's meant the world to Mark, all of our Game Over hosts. And there's probably going to be more seasons where they're going to lose more than they win. But one of the things that I really want to focus on is the guys who are here for the long haul are making huge, huge strides. So I don't really worry game by game, like where Montreal ranks in terms of like the expected goals differential for and against. I look at the top line playing against top checkers without anybody to insulate them, to draw checkers away from them, playing heavy minutes and playing excellent. And I think that's what you have to focus on. You have to focus on Kaiden Guhle, despite his struggles, still trending towards a top pairing defenseman when you've got Reinbacher and Hudson in the wings. I look at, yes, Mike Matheson can be frustrating, but he can always be brilliant as well. And there are going to be players coming in, they're going to take over Mike Matheson's role. Like, how fun is 3-on-3 overtime going to be with Caufield, Suzuki, Hudson? Think about it. Like, think about how fun that's going to be in a couple of years. And they're probably going to take another, like, really strong player this year in the draft. It sucks they're probably not going to get Macklin Celebrini, but maybe they can get Caden Lindstrom. Maybe they can find a way to get a guy like Cole Yzerman. Even if they fall further down the draft, hey, if they can get Iginla, Jerome Iginla's son, how much would you want a Jerome Iginla clone on the Montreal Canadiens? Like, now that's all right too. Even if it's not the elite player that you wanted, there's lots of positives to look forward to. So I'm not in the business of telling anyone how they should enjoy sports and how they should be a fan. But I think there's so much positive going on around this team that if they're making you mad, look to what actually matters and don't get focused down on the stuff that doesn't, right? The current results aren't a big deal. What is a big deal is how much their young players are improving. Deshirin says, Andrew, if you could pick any single young player to add to this rebuilding team, 23 years old and under, who would be your dream add? I mean, Connor Bedard, right? I mean, that's pretty easy. That's cheating. I feel like there's got to be somebody else out there that I could look at. I mean, Adam Fantilli would be great too. I think having someone else down the middle who could force it to be like Doc as third line center would be incredible. Finding other wingers for Doc too, I think would be really good. Like if you can get into a situation where, your third line ends up being like Owen Beck and Alex Newhook and some other big wing, like Joshua Waugh, right? And then what you've got out of like, that's like your premium third line. And then your second line has even better players on it. It's pretty good, right? It's a pretty good start. Oh, Jack Hughes, Rock Smasher says that's a great one too. The only thing is Jack Hughes, I don't want to spread any rumors or anything, but I've heard some kind of bad off-ice stuff about Jack Hughes. And also, he's injured. I think he needs possibly to get surgery. So, the Canadiens don't need more injured players. I guess Bedard's also injured. Kay says, can we also get some love from Montembeault? Yes, absolutely. what can you say about him at this point, right? Like the composure that he has under pressure is just incredible. I'm really impressed with Montembeault and how he keeps improving. It's crazy that first season where he was with the Canadiens, how far he's come since then. And I know he was playing injured for a lot of it, but he was not great, right? And we all saw it. He was a nice kid, but he struggled. And now he is establishing himself as not just, the 1A goaltender, but he is the Canadian starter, unquestionably. He's been consistent. He, like tonight, what a battler. And his determination to get that shootout win was something. He's really great. I really appreciate him. Oh no, yeah, Devils fans get upset talking about the Hughes brothers, I'm sure. Yeah, but you know what? From what I've heard, Quinn is the only good Hughes player or Hughes brother. That's just what I've heard behind the scenes. Um, let's see here. Francois Duchesne says, "Do you think Doc at 2C is an option for a contender team?" I think it's a loaded question, Francois, because we don't know what Doc looks like right now, right? Like we saw him for preseason in a game this year and it looked great, but we haven't seen a full season of Kirby Doc. So he needs to stay healthy. That's the end of it, right? We don't know how good he can be because he just hasn't been able to play. And that sucks. I think right now, like as we've seen from him so far, he's very easily like a decent second line center. His goal scoring probably isn't enough to be, an upper echelon second line center, but it's going to come down to his wingers too. Like if Kirby Doc is, your center and he's scoring 20 goals a year and he's a really good playmaker, drives play at both ends, but his wingers end up being, two guys as good as Cole Caufield, for example, not necessarily in terms of goal scoring, but overall game, then yeah, that can be a contending second line. The Canadians still need to find those players. Maybe Philip Meshar becomes one of those players. You look at the offensive production he's putting up in the OHL and the World Juniors. I don't want to write him off. I think that if he was an inch or two taller, Canadians fans would be frothing at the mouth at the possibility for him. So there's lots of players that have the opportunity to take big steps with this organization. We don't know who it's going to be. I think that's the big thing is right now it's exciting times, but we don't know who's going to take that step or if anyone will. So it's a bit of a waiting period. We'll find out if they can build that line with Doc to become as good or close to as good as the Suzuki line is currently. Let's see here. Driftwater says, Leafs fan just hopping on to say Montembeault played like a king tonight. That save in the shootout was lights out amazing. You're right, Dr. Firewater. He was fantastic. He did save the game several times in OT as well. You're right. Jeez, the last seconds, right? That giveaway by Matheson, two great opportunities for the Rangers, and Montembeault stopped them both. Awkward shots, too. He was fantastic. Really keyed in. DeSharon says, who knows if it was a good thing or not? We can't read the future, so we might as well enjoy the games as they come. Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like you can get bogged down in the tanking stuff, but you could tank perfectly like Anaheim did last year and lose the lottery. And they're not upset about Leo Carlson, but they'd probably rather Connor Bedard. And that's happened twice to Anaheim, where they've missed out on generational players. They also had the highest odds to draft Sidney Crosby and lost. And that time got Bobby Ryan, which... Listen, Bobby Ryan was a good player. Seems like a nice guy too, from my limited interactions with him. But when you go from Crosby to Bobby Ryan, and you had the best odds for Crosby, that is an organization crusher. So tanking doesn't always work, right? We've seen it go bad for teams before. Let's see what else we got here before we close things out. Any other questions? I'm not seeing anything. Let's see. Yeah, winning is more fun than tanking, Trinka says. Yeah, it is. And also, I think we have to remember that these players are young and they're learning, right? So playing in games that matter is going to help them later on when the games really matter. So there's no such thing as games that mean nothing when you have a bunch of young players in your team who are still developing and learning things. Deshirin says Edmonton had more lottery wins than anyone, and they were still asked for years. Yeah, it's true. And this is why I think Hughes and Gorton have been consistently saying things like, you have stars in other teams that can't make the playoffs, and people get freaked out about what they're saying because it sounds like they're saying they don't need any more talent in the lineup. That's not what they're saying, guys. They're saying there's multiple things that you have to do to build a contender, and not all of them are about the top of the draft. Some of them are about building a complete team, building 4 functioning lines, 3 functioning D pairs, and getting a killer goaltender to help them out. There's lots of pieces left to be put in place, but so far the pieces that the Canadiens have put in place that are long term look really good to me. So hopefully they get their superstars, but we'll see. Yeah, didn't the Red Wings not tank for years and never win the lottery? Yes, they actually lost several times and moved down, I think. Francois Duchesne says, thank you for taking the time or answering questions. Really appreciate it. We do it every time on this show. At the end of the show, we have a little press conference where we talk back and forth. We love you guys. Honestly, you mean everything to us. The show doesn't happen without you. So if you're a live watcher or a podcast listener or a YouTube watcher on replay, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, from the bottom of Mark Dumont's heart. I know that I can speak for him in this respect. We appreciate the hell out of you, and we'll see you again next game.